Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining. This is the Alaska CASC Skill Building Series. We started this last spring to support the training and professional development needs of CASC fellows and scientists, as well as others within IARC and our partners and collaborators. We've covered topics from meeting facilitation to visual communication and funding opportunities. And this is an ongoing series, so we're always really appreciative of any feedback or topic suggestions that folks would like to hear in the future. Please reach out to myself or Mike or Jessica if those come to you at any point. But today we're going to be talking about building successful NSF proposals. So we'll have a chance to hear about and discuss topics like NSF proposal opportunities, interacting with program officers, developing collaborative and co-produced proposals, and more. So our speakers today are Erica Hill, Arctic Social Sciences Program Director at NSF and UIS Professor, and Olivia Lee, Arctic Observing Network Program Director and IARC faculty member. But just before I hand it over to them, please throughout the time, feel free to add your questions in the chat. We will keep an eye on them and have a chance to discuss and read them out afterwards. And with that, I will hand it over to Erica to get us started.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so Olivia and I wanted to give you some basic background on what NSF is and who we are so that you could just have a better sense of overall what we do. So NSF is a federal agency, and we are primarily, we're the major source of research funding for most US-based researchers. So if you're faculty across the country, we're the ones that provide the vast majority of basic research funding in the United States for disciplines that range from glaciology to sociology to engineering. We have a federal budget of over $8 billion a year, and that is probably going to go up in the very near future. Olivia and I both sit in the Geosciences Directorate. There are multiple different directorates at NSF, including biology, engineering, social, behavioral, and economic sciences, and several others. But the Office of Polar Programs is in the Geosciences Directorate for some historical reasons that are sort of complicated. But polar programs includes both Arctic sciences and Antarctic sciences. Obviously, our focus here in Alaska is going to be on Arctic sciences, and both Olivia and I are in the Arctic section. So Arctic Sciences has several programs within it, and each of these programs has a program officer or manager or director. It's all interchangeable for NSF. So we have Arctic Natural Sciences, so that includes glaciology is a big one there. Arctic Social Sciences, that's the program that I currently manage. Arctic Observing Network, which Olivia is currently program manager with a colleague, Roberto Delgado, in AON or Arctic Observing. We have Arctic System Science. We have a Polar Cyber Infrastructure Program, and we have Arctic Research and Support and Logistics. Now, don't feel too intimidated. You may think, oh my gosh, I don't know where I belong. That's okay. We all work really closely together. Program officers talk to each other all the time. And so one of the things that we want to get across in this meeting or in this presentation is to make you feel more comfortable about getting a hold of us, reaching out and saying, hey, I have an idea. Are you the right person to talk to? Because if we're not the right person, we know who you should talk to and we can get you in touch with them. So don't stress or waste time worrying about, oh my gosh, is this Arctic Natural Sciences or is this Arctic System Science? Is sort of, it could be one, it could be the other. Don't worry about it. Pick the best fit and reach out. We'll get you to where you need to be. So some really basic principles that apply to just about all applicants to National Science Foundation. First of all, you need a US institutional affiliation. In other words, you need to be part of an institute of higher education somewhere in the United States. There are also some other non-governmental organizations and so museums, things like that, that also are able to apply to NSF. But for the vast majority of proposals, they're coming from a US institution like UAF, UAS, or any one of the dozens and dozens and dozens of different universities across the country. That doesn't rule out working with foreign countries and foreign institutions, but we don't give awards directly to foreign institutions. Our most common kind of proposal and award is the Standard Research Award. This is a proposal for some kind of research that can be for up to 5 years. And this cross-cuts all of NSF programs, all NSF programs except some kind of standard research. And we have a solicitation, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this presentation, that you would look to for if you wanted to apply for a standard research award. We also have specific types of awards for people who are beginning work on their dissertations. We have awards, the postdoctoral fellowship or the PDF. This is a 2-year award for people who have recently graduated with their PhD and want to do a couple of years of a postdoc on a specific research topic. We also have Faculty Early Career Development Program, or the Career Program. This is for recently hired folks who now have a pre-tenure situation at a university who really want to kickstart their career with a big 5-year project that's really going to launch them and an educational program. We can talk a little bit more about that. And then we have the Mid-Career Advancement, or MCA, and that is for post-tenure. So folks who've gotten to, for the most part, an associate professor position. So this is not an exhaustive list, but this does tell you some of the basic types of opportunities. And I've given them here to you in sort of order, career order. You might go from dissertation research to a postdoc fellow, to an early career award, to a mid-career advancement award. And most of these, well, not most, all of them have eligibility criteria with regard to what stage in your career you need to be at. And we can always provide you with more information on that. Each solicitation, though, provides details that you can take a look at. And if you need help interpreting them, we can do that. I'm going to turn this over to Olivia now for this next slide.
Yeah, so just a little bit more variety of the types of proposals you can submit. There are rapid proposals, conference workshops. The details of them you can find also on our main solicitation for the Arctic section. Again, with any of these, we very much encourage you to send an email to a program manager to discuss the concept before you put too much effort into developing a proposal, especially for some of these that are run only with internal review. Next slide, Erica.
So we want to talk a little bit about some of our priorities, and this is not an exhaustive list. We are interested in disciplinary research, so research that really is focused on a specific discipline, as well as inter and multidisciplinary research. Often, though, you need to fit your type of research question to the right solicitation. And a solicitation is just a fancy way of saying a call for proposals. I'm going to back up here and just point out here at the bottom, see NSF Arctic Research Opportunity Solicitation. That is the most general solicitation for any kind of Arctic research. And it's the place you should start if you're not sure, if you're not sure which solicitation would be best for you. But this, the ARO, which is solicitation 21-526, that means it was updated in 2021. This is the one for all standard research that you would start with. So disciplinary as well as interdisciplinary. We're really interested, because we are a geographically focused Arctic section, we are serious about engagement with local communities. We do not want to reproduce the kind of extractive research practices that we've seen in the past, where scientists go into communities, they live in communities, and they extract information, or they extract samples, or they extract knowledge and don't return it to communities. We want to see a real plan in any research project that engages communities, and it doesn't have to be co-production, although we certainly encourage co-production at all stages of research, but there needs to be authentic engagement there. And this is often part of broader impacts. In other words, the societal benefits of your work, because we're not just looking at, is your work going to advance science, but also how is your work going to actually help people, help society, advance education, or contribute to community needs, or respond to community needs. So we want to see that authentic engagement. And this applies not just to social scientists like anthropologists who go and are actually engaging with people and collecting information, but also for environmental scientists who may be working out of a village. In other words, you may say be based in, I don't know, Nome. Maybe that's your home base and you go out and do sampling or whatever. That doesn't mean that you don't also owe something back to that community where you're taking resources, where you're living, sometimes for months at a time. We want to see you return information, results, research findings to that community. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. We are also interested in broadening participation. Geosciences is not very diverse at this point in time, and we really want to see more diversity. We want to see more women. We want to see more folks from underrepresented groups. We want to see more people who have diverse backgrounds, whether that's ethnic or gender or religious or whatever. We want diversity in the geosciences. We want open data sharing, access, and reusability to the extent possible, because, as many of you know, we're working in often Native communities. We want to make sure that the data that we're collecting is being ethically collected with full and informed consent, and also that we're not sharing any information that hasn't been that would potentially harm people or violate their data sovereignty. And we can talk about this in greater detail, but we take data sharing and open accessible data very seriously at NSF. But we're also happy to talk to you if you have concerns about, hey, I don't know if this is safe to share, or whether or not this information might be sensitive. Back to Olivia.
So just a real quick outline of how to get started if you've never worked on an NSF proposal. We encourage you to take a good look at the solicitation, and if there are Dear Colleague letters that outline specific interests or priorities, take a look at those too. And then the next big step really is to get in touch with your program officer. Email is always preferable, please. If you do want to meet with us, send us an email so we can schedule something. Don't cold call us, because might get it down on the list of priorities. And then consider the development of a one-pager to support additional information about your proposal ideas. It'll include an overview and then a little bit on the broader impacts and intellectual merit.
Yeah, so that one pager basically gives us an idea of what you're thinking about. And most program officers like to have just a little bit of an overview, maybe a paragraph. It doesn't have to be perfectly polished, but we want to have an idea of what you're doing so we can sort of think it through before we get on Zoom and talk to you. As I said, doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be polished, but we also want to think through your intellectual merit and broader impacts. These are the two NSF merit review criteria. They're the criteria that we look for when we're reading proposals, and they're the criteria that we ask reviewers to evaluate when we send proposals out for review. These are the kind of things you should, tattoo on your forearm so you don't forget. Intellectual merit. How does your work advance science? How does it advance your discipline, or how does it advance science more generally? And we don't have specific kinds of, well, we want this kind of intellectual merit, but not that kind. Intellectual merit can be really general, or it can be very specific. Broader impacts, very generally, how does your work benefit others? There is no specific 50-50 balance or 60-40 balance in this. It's project specific. So some projects have a ton of intellectual merit and broader impacts. Some are heavier on the broader impacts than the intellectual merit. It just depends on what your project is, but it's up to you to make the argument for both, that you have the intellectual merit and you're affecting broader impacts. We take broader impacts seriously. And I know that we often get questions about this. Oh, do broader impacts really matter? Yes, they do. Olivia?
So just a quick outline of what the merit review process might look like. Of course, this varies quite a bit across NSF and even within GEO. A lot of the Arctic solicitations have moved to a no deadline, but there are some that do have a specific deadline, in which case you do need to meet that deadline, or it can be returned to you, will be returned to you without review. In the review process, some proposals will only go through a mail-in ad hoc review, some will make it to panel, and finally the program officer will make the final recommendation for funding. Do you want to add anything, Erica?
No, I think that's good. Not all of our programs have panels. My program, for example, uses just ad hoc review, which is what we used to call mail-in reviews. It's reviews we send out to different experts around the country. Right now, most of our panels, where we pull a lot of people together, actually all of our panels right now are virtual. So we'll have 2 days of meetings with experts from around the country who will all sit together and discuss proposals together, and then we'll discuss pros and cons and then rank them.
I'll also add that just real quick, that you as the research community play an important role as reviewers too. So if you do see a request for a review from one of us program managers, even if you don't have the ability to review it at the time, please respond to that email. Maybe suggest alternate reviewers, because that really helps keep the process going, and we really rely on our research community to help allow the review process go as smoothly as possible and identify experts. We can only be experts in a certain number of disciplines, and so we rely on the greater research community to help us identify experts outside of our field.
Yep, and there is nothing like doing a review yourself for really getting a better understanding of what intellectual merit is and what broader impacts are. When you're looking for those things in someone else's work, sometimes it's a lot easier to see it than it may be for you to sort of articulate it for your own work. Okay, writing a proposal is not like writing a paper. The process can be very similar in the sense that you're submitting something, it's reviewed, you get feedback, but the approach you want to take to a proposal is not at all the same. So a proposal is, what do you want to do? And how does that articulate with the goals of the funder? In this case, NSF. It's future oriented. It's proposing work. That's why it's called a proposal. In contrast, a paper is reporting on something that has been done. So there's a different temporal perspective here, with a proposal being future oriented and a paper being, this is what was done. A proposal should provide us with a nice, clear, defined project with clearly defined objectives and activities. We want to know what you want to achieve with this work, and we want to know what work you want to do. So be specific with your activities. We want you to be persuasive. Tell us why something is important. Tell us and explain why it's feasible, why you can do this, why you have the qualifications and the facilities and the expertise that is right for this. We want you to convey enthusiasm about this. This does not mean put in a lot of exclamation points. because you're not writing an email. But we do want to know that you think you have something exciting to explore, that you can answer interesting and exciting relevant questions. We want to hear that or sense that enthusiasm as we read your proposal. We want you to adhere to the length constraints. Be brief and clear. This is not the place to go on and on, especially not the place to go on and on about the theoretical background. Okay, and a little bit more about that later. Really, it's more about what are you specifically going to do? And we want you to use accessible language. If you do need to use technical terms, make sure you explain what they are, because especially if you're doing a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary project, there's a good chance that your reviewers may not have the exact same set of expertise that you have. So don't alienate them by using a lot of jargon or acronyms that are only known or familiar to the people in your narrow field. So just a quick contrast here, papers are expository, they're explanatory. Papers tend to be more impersonal, objective, have fewer length constraints, and often, especially if you're publishing in a very specific journal that's disciplinary focused, you use a lot of specialized terminology and everybody already knows what that is. Remember, proposal, not like that at all. Moving over to Olivia.
So here are just a few mistakes that we often see in proposals. You focus too much on just doing incremental advances in science that may not come out very transformative or exciting to reviewers. And that's something to keep in mind. As Erica mentioned, putting too much emphasis of your limited page length on theory is not recommended. Just give enough to give the background and then really focus on what you would like to do and provide information on the methodology so that reviewers can get a good feel that you know what you're doing and then understand what your plans are. It's well thought out. Keep in mind that your description of the project scope is important. If it's too large or too narrow, sometimes it can come off as not really being exciting or relevant. Again, depending on the type of solicitation you're responding to, that's something you should keep in consideration. And of course, making sure that you portray in your proposal that you have the facilities, experience, research team that are the right ones to be able to achieve the project goals.
So here are a few best practices. Start with a compelling introduction, right? Introduce in the first paragraph, what your big issue is and how it relates to bigger issues. We want you to convey the significance of your project. That right there, that's the intellectual merit. Why is it important that you do this work? Identify where and when your project is. You would be amazed at how many proposals I get about the Arctic. And the first thing I want to know is where in the Arctic? Are we talking Alaska, Scandinavia, Iceland, Russia, the middle of the Beaufort Sea? Where are we talking about? So tell us where, tell us when, if your project has a time component. You may want to use figures, but use them wisely because reviewers pay attention to that. And if you put a figure in, it should be really doing a job for you, that taking the place of text that you could have. So maps and timelines may be appropriate, and make sure that they're clear and they show what you think they should show and that they are sufficiently good resolution to be readable. A lot of illegible figures show up in proposals and they're really not benefiting you. Lay out a clear work plan. This may be a table that shows a schedule of work, year 1, year 2, year 3, with different people doing different things if it's a really complex project, or it may be simply narrative, a brief narrative with bullet points or something like that. But give us an idea of what you are going to accomplish when. Explain roles for each participant, especially if you've got a big team or you've got multiple people. I've seen projects that include highly specialized people, but don't explain what that person is doing. If you have a statistician and you're going to include them as a co-PI, a co-principal investigator. Tell me what kind of statistics that person's going to be doing. You may need to really sit down with that person and have that person write a paragraph about the statistics so that it can be an integrated part of your proposal. But make sure it is integrated, and make sure, again, that those statistics are understandable to people who aren't statisticians. Finally, come up with a realistic budget. Do not try to go cheap, because we know that. We can see it. There really isn't any, we're not going to think more highly of your project if you're trying to be cheap about it. We have a good sense of what kind of money it takes to do work in Alaska. And you're not doing anyone any favors by skimping on a budget when you really do need a certain kind of analysis or a certain kind of equipment. On the other hand, we're not going to give you a specific number or budget limit unless the solicitation has a budget limit. And there are solicitations that do have strict limits. But basically, we want your budget to reflect the activities that you're doing. Use your budget justification to explain why you need this piece of equipment, or why you need to pay this expert, or why you need to do a specific activity.
Yep. So here are some of the big themes that could fall under broader impacts. The idea, again, is that if you're doing very disciplinary research, which NSF funds, that NSF also wants to see how you benefit society as a whole. So you could include teaching and training opportunities, broadening participation, building additional partnerships, meeting community needs. Again, no single proposal has to do all of these. Depends on what your strengths are and what your project is about. I think that trying to just check a box to say I did all of these things that fall under broader impacts is not necessarily going to be considered a good broader impacts proposal. And keep in mind too that reviewers are now becoming a little bit more critical, and this gets to your question in the chat, Bob, which we'll get to later, about what makes a good broader impact statement, and whether or not you as a PI proposing the work are too vague or hand wavy with your broader impact. If it doesn't appear as well thought out as your intellectual merit, your proposal can also do less well in review.
A little bit more information here on broader impacts. Often, in order to achieve broader impacts, you need to have a dissemination plan. So it's not just enough to say, I'm going to publish in journals. We want some detail on that. What journals might you be thinking of? Maybe you're going to organize a special issue of a journal. What journal might that be? What conferences do you think you'll be presenting at? Are you going to be presenting at a disciplinary conference? Are you going to be presenting at a massive national conference, an international conference? Because that's going to tell us who you're going to reach with your research. Also, think about community dissemination, and that can be part of your broader impacts. It's not enough to just say, I plan to make a public presentation to the community. That's just not good enough. Do you plan to make a public presentation in a school to school kids? Do you plan to make a community presentation in the high school gym? Do you plan to give a talk to elders? Do you plan to have a meeting around coffee where you just discuss findings? All of these things are fine, and all of these things might be appropriate, but we need to know a little bit about what you want to do. It could be something like curriculum. You can use an NSF award to pay a curriculum person to develop specifically targeted curriculum, if that's something that the community wants and you think would be a good match for your kind of project. You might do posters, you might do pamphlets that you distribute to community members. You might have a small exhibit, maybe in the Community Heritage Center or museum. Again, none of these things are, you have to do this or you have to do that. We want you to match your dissemination plan with the kind of community that you're working in and what would be best and most appropriate for them. So tailor the dissemination plan to the community needs. And again, I can't say this enough. We want you to have a plan for dissemination and engagement. You know, maybe you're going to go and at the end of every field season, you're going to have a small opportunity for you to present your findings and interact with the community. Maybe you're going to plan to go and give an opening presentation at the beginning of every field season. Maybe at the end of your 3 years, you're going to come back and give a slideshow and I don't know, take feedback. Again, we don't want to tell you what your broader impact should be. We want you to figure that out in communicating with your communities or through discussion with your colleagues. You can figure out what's most appropriate for your community.
Is that me, Erica?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so again,
I can do it.
yeah, I mean, I know this part is not the happy part, but it happens to the best of us. Sometimes proposals get declined. The main thing is don't get discouraged, especially if you're new to the process. It can be a lot to navigate. When you've had a chance to settle down a little bit, you don't have to go through the reviews right away. There's program officer notes will probably be of great value to you. And then of course, reach out to colleagues, especially if you're hoping to work on a resubmission, and then contact your program officer to discuss your proposal and maybe strategize your next steps. Erica?
Yeah, and we all know people who are super successful at NSF, but I can almost guarantee you that those super successful people have also been declined, because the only way you're successful is if you go through that decline process. And one of the best ways to learn how to be successful is to get a decline, revise and resubmit. The average successful proposal only occurs, what's the average is 2.3 times. So most people have to apply more than once before they're successful. But what do you do if you're awarded? If you get that email from the program officer, it says, we want to recommend your project for award. Yay, that's great. Read the reviews and the panel summary anyway, because I've never had a set of reviews come in that didn't have something useful to say, even if it was primarily positive. Be sure that you credit the award and NSF when you publish or present. So make sure we're in the acknowledgements, you identify your award. The last slide at a presentation, put it up there. And we might be in the audience, so we definitely want to see that you're acknowledging that. We're happy to provide you with assistance after you receive your award, but the PAP-G, which is our massive proposal guidelines, is also out there. You will be asked to write annual reports on what you've achieved, what your obstacles or challenges were, any publications or conference papers. So write your annual reports on time. Develop good rapport with your program officer and keep them updated. This is not, we don't need to know every little change or adjustment you do in your work, but if you are running into obstacles or you do have something fantastic to share, like you've just had an article accepted in Science, let us know, drop us an email, because we'll probably share it around the office and we'll be happy. Be a good mentor to the students and colleagues you support. And all of these things are going to advance science and benefit society. So it all goes back to those merit review criteria. Here are a couple more suggestions for Olivia's going to share.
So these next couple slides will go real quick. Our response to what Molly asked is to talk about how to develop collaborative research projects. And Erica and I just brainstormed a few ideas. They don't all work so well in terms of how comfortable you are networking. We do like the ability to attend smaller conferences. I think in big conferences like AGU, you can get lost. Presenting posters where you have more opportunities to interact with people one-on-one, attending workshops and webinars, especially if they're in a discipline that's not your field of research. That may be a good opportunity to both network and learn about topics that may be of interest to you. And then IARC in particular, you have great opportunities to work across disciplines. So get to know your colleagues well. And then read newsletters such as Witness the Arctic that Marcus puts out on a regular basis. Thanks, Marcus.
Speaking of ARCUS, this just came across our desk, and so I figured I'd throw it up in a slide as a way to basically be familiar with what's going on around you. The ARCUS annual meeting, as you know, ARCUS is centered in Fairbanks. They're going to have an online event that is going to have opportunities to connect, hear about research, learn about other things that are going on. So, stay up to date, talk with people, ask them about their work. We all want to talk about our work. So, talk to other folks around, check out that new postdoc who's down the hall, who might be doing some interesting work. Talk with folks. I know it can be hard, and I know a lot of us are, really introverted, but do your best to network and be aware of what's going on around you with regard to research.
And just put up that slide. Yeah, we don't have to go over it. I'll put the link in the chat for the NSF Arctic Community Engagement.
Yeah, this is the ACE page that we've just developed, and you can find it on the NSF website just by searching community engagement or ACE, and it just gives you some ideas and guidelines about respectful and responsible community engagement in Alaska. Well, in general, but in Alaska focused for us. So that's the end of our presentation. I'm going to put up our email for both of us. It looks like I only put up the Arctic Social Sciences link. Sorry about that, Olivia. But you can find the Arctic section on the NSF website. But do reach out, but we're going to be happy to take questions or comments. I'm going to end the slideshow if I can. There we go. Okay.
Thank you so much, Erica and Olivia. That was some really great insight. And luckily we have plenty of time for questions and discussion. So maybe while folks, we have a question right now. Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, Katrina, and go ahead and ask it.
Hey, Erica and Olivia. I have a quick question. So one thing that I have encountered personally in a project I'm working on, and then in a project that I was familiar with, but not directly involved in, with respect to social science in particular in the Arctic, sometimes things can come up that, cause you to need to change course or make some, changes to what you had originally proposed. And so I'm wondering what kinds of mechanisms are in place when, the need arises to potentially make slight course corrections or change things as you're working through your project.
Yep, absolutely. It looks like I'm frozen, but I'm still here. So if you do have an award and you run into a challenge or something comes up, first of all, reach out to us and let us know about it. It's nothing that we can't get around, because NSF does have a mechanism for changing the scope or objectives of your research. So let's say you get out and you find that your original research plan just isn't going to work. We would ask you to basically meet with us. We would work out a plan for how to either set new objectives or reorient your objectives or rescope your work. We would ask you to submit basically a short intention to rescope electronically via Fastlane. It comes under award functions. And once that's approved, you basically have authorization to go and pursue this new plan. We've been doing that a lot with COVID because many people have run into problems where they simply cannot do what they originally proposed. And so we're simply talking them through a rescoping and a reorientation Once that's approved, you can reallocate your budget as needed to accomplish those new objectives.
Bob, did you want to ask your question live? So we're not just reading it in the chat.
I'm sure I can. I'm just curious about, with regards to increasing diversity of underrepresented and fostering a more scientifically diverse community. Are there plans within NSF or discussion within NSF about having almost like a metric or a section on how will this research contribute to fostering a more, or what's your plan for this? And if there is no plan, justifying it, like if you're just writing code by yourself, that might be not something that's applicable, but if you're working in a community, it might be very applicable. Is that on the table, or is there any thoughts around that?
Olivia, I mean, I can take that. So we don't ask you to have specific metrics, but we do ask you to make reasonable efforts wherever possible. And it could be something as simple as, hiring a student to help you with that code who happens to be Indigenous, or hiring folks, providing a community with some paid work in a rural community where that might be valuable. It might be taking a student from who's female or from an alternative gender or from something else along with you to a conference so they have the opportunity to present. It may be getting somebody out into the field or providing them with an opportunity for a master's degree. There's lots of different ways this can be done, but we do value individual single, like I will provide one student with the opportunity to do X. As I think anyone who's a teacher knows, that one-on-one interaction and that one-on-one support and opportunity can make major differences. And so yes, we don't have sort of these expectations that everybody will do X, Y, Z. It might be engaging, first graders. If you go out to a community and you involve first graders in a Yupik village in your STEM research, that's engagement and that's diversity, because you're engaging folks in STEM who aren't well represented in the geosciences. So does that answer your question?
Yes and no. I'm wondering. I'll add a bit, maybe, Bob, to your question too. I think with that topic particularly, it falls under the broader impacts, and we aren't very prescriptive about it. Kind of each division directorate kind of has their own culture around what they feel is good broader impacts. And I feel like the Arctic is definitely one of the research communities that's a lot more sensitive to what makes a good broader impacts, and that includes broadening participation. So, yes, and I don't think NSF-wide that's something that's going to be happening in the near term because it's a little bit prescriptive for the broader impacts. But you can do a lot too with just communicating within your research community that will ultimately be part of the reviewers to really start questioning proposals and PIs about, look, you didn't really address this well. We think this is important and that there's opportunity that you've missed, and your program managers take that into consideration when reading the reviews. So you play a big role too as the review community.
Yeah, and so it would fall under the broader impacts right now. I was thinking about something moving into the future because, it wasn't all that long ago that broader impacts weren't that big a part of the NSF proposal, but now it's a major component. And so I'm wondering if a more diverse and equitable, would that be almost a second or a third sort of section, intellectual merits, broader impacts, encouraging or broadening diversity and equity. That's what I was sort of getting at, if it's something moving forward, but it sounds like it's a broader impacts thing right now.
Yeah, yes, we definitely consider it a broader impact. And I think what you're getting at is it can be the primary, most important, broader impact that you achieve.
Hi, Gabe. Any question?
Hi, yes, I do. Thanks very much, Erica and Olivia, for presenting this and being available for questions. My question is really about geography. In the past, you know, I've been a little bit confused with the Arctic Observing Network and what is possible. And so I'm just wondering, with respect to Alaska, what is considered Arctic enough?
Well, if you're talking about the AON program in particular, we have a very broad description of what is relevant to Arctic. And there can be projects that are done completely outside of the Arctic, but in regions where the information is relevant to the Arctic. So, you know, if you're working on avalanches, for example, that could be done with research outside of the Arctic completely. But if it can be applied to the Arctic, it would be of interest to the Arctic program. So again, if there's ever any question about whether it's relevant or not, just ping a program manager. But there isn't like strict geographic restrictions on what can and cannot apply.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I would just reinforce that for my program, Arctic Social Sciences, very general. I mean, all of Alaska is basically Arctic, even though, as you know, it's not. Technically, anything in Iceland, Greenland, most of Scandinavia, anything in Siberia generally comes my way. A lot of things in northern Canada, whether it's taiga or tundra. Again, is it relevant to the Arctic? And something else that's important here is because the Arctic section has its own research support and logistics, we're a lot more better situated to handle sort of the challenges, the safety and the transportation and communication challenges of working in the North than a lot of other programs. And so we're the right home for many projects, even if they're not, you know, so for example, if you're working on the Juneau ice sheet, you know, we do glaciology all the time. And so even though the Juneau ice sheet isn't the Arctic, we support work there. So I hope that helps.
It does. Yeah, thanks very much.
Joanna, I think you're next in line.
Hi, sorry I can't unmute it or show my video at the moment, but thank you, Olivia and Erica, very much. That was a really helpful presentation. And I have sort of a foundational question that I've never understood. I was hoping you might be able to describe what a Dear Colleague letter is and exactly sort of what role it plays. Like, does every RFP have a Dear Colleague letter, or yeah, sort of how is it positioned relative to an RFP?
I can take that, Olivia, if you want me to. So a Dear Colleague letter helps us bring quickly to the research community an issue or a question that we are all interested in, that we are especially welcoming work on, or we want to highlight its importance to you. So for example, Arctic had a Dear Colleague letter a few years ago about data management that basically said, hey, Arctic community, data management plans are really important, and here's what we want you to do. We now point to that data management DCL all the time when we're talking to PIs about how to manage data. However, a more recent Dear Colleague letter talked about sample reuse. And it was very quickly promulgated with COVID when all of a sudden people found out, hey, I can't go to the field this year. What do I do? The Dear Colleague letter said, hey, we're really interested in folks using museum collections, existing samples, existing specimens to do work. We're happy to take that kind of proposal in at this time. it wasn't something that we wanted to send out a whole new solicitation, but we did want to let the community know we were receptive and interested in those kinds of questions. So Dear Colleague letters can fulfill a lot of different roles, but in general, they let the community know that there's something of importance or interest. You don't have to, if there is a Dear Colleague letter that you are specifically saying, hey, this applies to me, you should mention that in your proposal and or to the program officer. Say, hey, I read this Dear Colleague letter, you know, I'd like to respond to it with this project. Include that in your one pager and talk it over with the program officer.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
I hope that also answered your question, Kristen, in the chat.
Yeah, thanks. I had that same question about how they're similar or different or how they go together. So that's super helpful.
Toby?
Yeah, thank you so much for a great presentation and also great questions from all you guys. I learned a ton. I have a question related to budgets and related really to what reviewers often see, at least for the kind of work that I'm proposing often, which are multidisciplinary projects that have physical natural sciences components, that have, you know, social science components. And the social science component, you know, it doesn't need to have a lot of fancy instruments often. And as a consequence, the social science components are often budgeted as a much lower proportion when you look at the kind of work across the entire proposal. This actually happened to me now 2 or 3 times in a row. Luckily, one of those big proposals got funded, but the other ones did not. And one major criticism was that the social science component wasn't really, apparently the reviewers thought wasn't budgeted as well as the natural sciences sections. And, you know, there are very drastically different types of science that requires different budgets. And I don't know, I just thought somehow that maybe sometimes it's unfair to kind of say, okay, the social sciences really need to have the same budget as the natural sciences. At least that's what I took away from the reviewers on a few of the projects. I just wanted you to kind of give me a little more background on that balance. And it's not always a balance, and it doesn't have to be always balanced. And so, yeah, I just want to get a better understanding of where NSF is going with that, especially in the more multidisciplinary fields. Thanks.
Olivia,
You take that first, Erica.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I recently sat on the COPE, the Coastlines and People Working Group, and those were big proposals that were supposed to have environmental science and social science components. We do not expect them to have 50-50. I mean, that may or may not be appropriate for your particular proposal. But what we tend to see, especially coming from environmental scientists, I know this big generalization, is the environmental science, the details, the methods, you know, the techniques, the references they're great, they're really in detail, they're everything we want to see. And then you're going to do some social science too. So you'll have surveys or something. That's what we see. And it's not the budget so much, at least in my experience, it's that the social science is generally given short shrift. In other words, the methods aren't really discussed. There's very little detail on who's going to do the activities, what it's going to involve, how it's going to occur, how it's going to be disseminated, how much time is involved. So we really recommend that if you have a social science component, you work with a social scientist to write that and develop the budget. And you have that person help you do the budget justification that explains no equipment is required for the social science or whatever. But, you know, increasingly, you know, reviewers are fairly sophisticated with this. And they know if the social science isn't well developed, and they'll call it out, especially if that is part of the solicitation. I've never run into a situation where, I mean, I don't know that reviewers have ever said, at least for in my experience, where, hey, the environmental science is getting $5 million, and the social sciences is only getting $1 million. Most of us know that the costs are completely different. The salaries are different. The equipment requirements are different. So I wouldn't expect that to be represented in the budget. Olivia?
Yeah, and just to add, if you will get all kinds of comments sometimes back from your reviewers or summaries, and that's not always what's taken into final consideration by the program manager in making that decision. At the end of the day, it's the program manager that makes that funding recommendation. So if you have any questions about, whether a specific reviewer comment was the tipping point for making that decision, make sure you chat with your managing program manager, just so you know that that was not the deciding factor, or what was the deciding factor in your proposal decision.
Yeah, and actually that reminds me of something. I've never declined a proposal because of the budget. A budget I don't know that anyone would decline a proposal because of a budget. The criteria are broader impacts and intellectual merit. A budget can always be adjusted either up or down, mostly down, but sometimes up. So if your social science is really well developed and it's good, but you don't have enough money in there, we'll say, hey, we think you should pay your social scientist for a whole month as opposed to 0.5 or something like that. We're not going to decline you because the social science budget isn't robust. So, and Olivia is exactly right that sometimes reviewers will have comments that as program officers we'll just completely ignore because either they're incorrect or they're just not accurate, or they don't represent the section's needs or priorities.
Jason, please. You had your hand up for a while.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I have a few questions, so we're probably going to run over here. So maybe it's best if I just email you. But so this is quick. So the career awards, like if you're a non-tenure track research professor, does that mean you're always eligible for a career award?
I would have to look at the solicitation criteria specifically to read through that to see. Yeah. I can follow up with you, Jason, on that if you want.
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Where are you? Are you in Fairbanks or Juneau?
I'm in Juneau.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So I want to follow up on Gabe's question. So it's really good to hear you say that Juneau or work down in Southeast Alaska is, well, not considered the Arctic, but would fit fine for ANS or et cetera, because it seems like we've had trouble at times fitting in based on our location. And so we've spent a lot of time in proposals and things like that trying to convince reviewers that our research area is worthy of inclusion in this. Is that something that we need to continue to do with the understanding of what you just said, or because we've just had criticism before about these types of things?
Well, I mean, again, it is very much dependent on your research question. And so if there are specific reviewer comments that you feel were unfair, please talk to your program manager for whichever program in the Arctic section you are working with. They'll be able to give you the best feedback for where they feel your proposal could stand to have the most improvements for success. I think that the program manager would also be happy to let you know if a particular project was just not a good fit for the Arctic before you invest a lot of research. So depending again on what your research topic is, that can play a big part of the decision process.
Yeah, I mean, I can say we just very recently supported a postdoc fellowship cooperatively, Arctic and Antarctic programs that was focused on the Juneau ice field. So, and we basically looked at it and we're like, is this glaciology relevant to Arctic and Antarctic? Yeah, it is. Let's support it. So in that case, it wasn't it wasn't really an issue at all. But I would absolutely reinforce what Olivia says, is reach out to specific program officers. Glaciology is actually holding joint panels now. So our Arctic glaciology and the glaciology program are both, I mean, so they're really tightly knit. But I would say reach out to program officers on that.
Okay, thanks. Okay, one more question. I'll cut it off then. So we've had I'm not going to reveal which program this is submitted to, but we've had proposals that reviewed extremely well. I've actually talked to the program officer who said that it was almost funded. So we resubmitted the following year with recommendations, et cetera, changes. Unfortunately, there was a new program officer, obviously different panel, et cetera, and it reviewed extremely poorly. And so basically, I've got the sense over the years that sometimes we're submitting at a moving target. And so I was wondering if if you have any suggestions on ways around this.
Yeah, that's a really tough one, Jason, especially when you do have rotators like myself and Erica coming in. Typically, when you get a proposal resubmission and the same managing program director gets to look at it, and even if the new panel comes up with different recommendations, they maybe have weighed it differently than a totally new program manager. I wish there was an easy way to say that sometimes it isn't a moving target, but it is never a guarantee that even if it's not like with a paper where if you make those corrections that it's gonna get accepted. Sometimes program priorities change. Sometimes it can just be portfolio balance at that point because other projects get funded in the meantime, and all of a sudden they have to look at the big portfolio that they manage, and if there's too much overlap, potentially that could play a role too. So yeah, I'm sorry, it is a bit of a moving target. I wish that was more of a guarantee of when you do resubmit addressing previous panel, but there's no guarantee that the new reviewers will be the same as the previous reviewers if you're the first submission too. Erica?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, when I get resubmissions, I try to have at least some of the same reviewers, because the expectation is, hey, the reviewer made this comment, the PI responded, now that's not a problem anymore. But sometimes those reviewers are no longer available, or they've moved on or something, or they can't review. You know, sometimes the time of year it comes in, you have no budget left, or you don't have the budget available for that. Sometimes a proposal comes in and you just funded a $3 million project that studied the same thing in another place. And it's just no longer going to add something to your portfolio the way it used to. The thing is, there's a lot more than just reviewer comments that go into whether or not we fund a proposal, as Olivia said. And, you know, the only way to really figure those out is to talk with a program officer. It does sound though that was just a tough position. We would ideally, something like that would not happen, but that is one of the reasons that we really encourage you to get in touch with the program officers. You know, even before you submit a proposal, if you think there's a new person, or if a new person comes in and, you know, you think 6 months down the line, you're going to be resubmitting or something, talk it through with them. And you may just get a sense, oh, this person, that's not their priority or whatever. But I'm sorry, that is a tough one.
Yeah, that's okay. That's very helpful. Actually, the second time around when we resubmitted it, we didn't bother reaching out to the program officer and didn't put that together. So yeah, it's just the way it worked out. So thanks. Yeah. This was very helpful today.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to reach out. You know, in Arctic especially, we try to be really open and develop one-on-one relationships. And we do appreciate it when you reach out and say, hey, I got this is coming in, just wanted to let you know, because, you know, sometimes there are things that we can let you know, hey, hold off, you know, until September, then we'll have the next fiscal year, something like that. It just depends. But don't be afraid to reach out.
We're about 5 minutes over, so thank you so much, Erica and Olivia, for all this insight and all your answers. I think it's been really helpful, and thanks to everyone who was able to join. Hopefully anyone has extra questions, they can follow up directly with Erica or Olivia. Keep an eye out for our next month's skill building series for when we have the information out for that. And I hope everybody has a really good Halloween weekend.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks again for this
Thank you for
opportunity.
joining
This was
us.
great.
Thank you so very much. Take care all and have a great weekend. And Jason, forward me that answer you